You're listening to Think About It with Pastor Peter Carbless.
Hey, this is Rick Broom, and I'm here with Pastor Peter Carbless, and we're embarking on a series of podcasts here that we're calling Think About It with Pastor Peter Carbless. Firstly, Peter, welcome.
Great to be here, Rick.
I guess what we want to do in this is really unpack some very basic concepts of the Christian faith, what we believe, why we believe it, and how that, I guess, applies to our day-to-day life and the decisions we make around our worldview and how we live as followers of Christ. So I guess that's where we're starting from.
Yep.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense.
So I really back to very basics. Today we're going to talk about who is God. Everyone has some concept of who or what God is. Many people believe in some sort of God, or they reject any concept of a God, but even in that, they're defining what a God is by rejecting it. So when we talk about God and believing in God, particularly in the Christian context, we're basically referring to the God revealed in the Jewish scriptures and the Christian Bible. So that's sort of our baseline. So who is this God?
Right, well, Jewish scriptures and Christian scriptures. Let's look at one of each. There's a well-known psalm which basically says something like, I'll lift up my eyes to the hills from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And so when we lift up our eyes to the hills, that's kind of saying, well, I'm looking at creation. I live in Kincumber, so I say when I lift up my eyes to Kincumber Mountain, or if I'm in the forest, I look at the trees, or if I look at the sky, I look at the sky. When Jesus told us to pray, he said, Our Father in heaven, in Uranos is the Greek word there. And that basically speaks of the spiritual foundation and ground from which everything comes. So I lift up my eyes to the hills means I'm looking at the creator of all things. And my health comes from the Lord, to emphasize this, the Lord who made heaven and earth. Now, back in the Old Testament days, and this is true in many cultures across the world, your God was the God of your nation. So Marduk was the god of the Babylonians. Zeus was the king of the gods of the Greeks. Jupiter was the god of the Romans. And a lot of the contests they had in the world was, my God is greater than your God. And the God was the God of their nation. But the Jewish concept was interesting. The concept of ancient Israel was quite fascinatingly interesting, because they didn't see God as just the God of their nation. They saw God as the God who had made the entire world. In Greek, the word is cosmos, the entire creation, the heavens, the earth, the stars, the moon, and all the nations. And this was a very different concept to what was originally, what was held by the nations around about those times. And they didn't see God as being just the God of their nation. They saw that the God of all the universe had selected their nation, and if you follow through the promise to Abraham, that their nation was called to be a blessing to all the other nations, to make the God of all things known. Now, that's the ancient idea. There's lots more we could say about exactly what that means. In the New Testament, you have where it says, right at the very beginning of the Gospel of John, in Greek it's enarche en hologos. Enarche, we translate, in the beginning was the word. But what's fascinating is that word arche, even to this day in modern Greek, doesn't just mean in the beginning, which we reduce to something like once upon a time. It's not that at all. The arche is the principle, from the foundational principle from which all things came to be, was the Logos. And that arche was almost a way of referring to the concept of God. And if you continue that with the Gospel of John, an arche en hologos, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? And then it goes on to say all things were created through him and made by him. So the biblical concept of God is the source and originator of all things. Even the laws of physics come from him. So it's kind of like people speak about the Big Bang. You know, the whole universe is like this gigantic explosion coming from what's been called the Big Bang. Well, it's kind of like the concept of God, understood both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, fits in with the idea of the one who is even beyond that. If you like, he's the one who lit the wick.
Okay, so, and I think you're touching on that already, but if we're going to accept that there is this God, what evidence is there for the existence of a God or the God?
Well, the first thing I'll say to any person who asks me that, I'll say the very fact that you and I are here is an indicator that there has to be something that caused all of this to come into being. There are fundamental structures of design in everything we do, and it's unreasonable to assume. It's unreasonable to assume it all came by random chance. And by the way, just to skite a little bit, when I was at Sydney Uni doing zoology, I got a high distinction and topped my class in evolutionary biology when I got my Bachelor of Science degree. But that was just before Noah got on the ark. That was quite a while ago. But the thing is that I began to see, even in those studies, that the insistence that it all happened by random chance, by random natural selection, whilst we could see evidence of natural selection and random things taking place, they did not have the explanatory power to explain how all things came into existence. So the very existence of the world, the existence of human beings, means there has to be some kind of a designer, something behind it. And then we can get into layers of things. We'll say, but where's your proof? And then I've got to say, well, okay, now we've got to talk about what do you actually mean by proof? There's mathematical proofs, there's legal proofs. And in the law, for example, there is proof beyond reasonable doubt. Proof by balance of probabilities, depending upon which court you're in. And the main thing I will have to say to people who say there is no proof for the evidence of God, I'll say, look, if you really take that seriously and you take a look at the concept of proof, you'll find that there is plenty of evidence that on the balance of probabilities, there has to be something. On the balance of beyond reasonable doubt, there has to be something. And one of the things that puzzles me is that many of the people who insist there is no proof for the existence of God refuse to acknowledge the balances of probabilities or the beyond reasonable doubt type of evidence that's abundant, right? And I say, well, hang on, why are you so insistent that there isn't something that reason suggests is entirely reasonable and highly likely to be there? Where does this opposition come from?
I've always felt, because I've believed in the whole narrative of God created since I was a teenager, and I've always felt it takes more faith to believe that all this around us could have come about by some set of random chance and random happenings and random mutations than it does to believe that there's actually something out there that's responsible for it.
Yes, precisely. It is sophisticated unreasoning. That's the best way I can put it. Why is it that you won't even acknowledge that on the balance of probabilities it's likely? Why won't you acknowledge that on the basis of beyond reasonable doubt it's likely? Or if you don't like to use the word likely, why is it you're not prepared to give credit to some of the greatest minds in history who have seen it beyond reasonable doubt? And on the balance of probabilities, there has to be this being.
How do you address the question where, and this is one that you often get in the whole conversation of creation evolution, is all the smart people believe in evolution, that it happened by chance. All the scientists believe in that. You'll hear that statement.
Well, first of all, it's simply not true. The proposition all don't believe that is not true. If you go back, Isaac Newton's main interest was theology, and he's one of the greatest foundations of modern science. One of the people I like to listen to is a fellow with 3 doctorates who's a professor of mathematics, now retired at Oxford University, John Lennox, and he spends a lot of time debunking that kind of argument. Again, what we find is people will find that there are atheistic scientists like Dawkins, Hawkins, and they're very noisy. Krauss, I can see them all, and I listen to their arguments, and I can see where the fallacies in their arguments are. And I'm quite happy to acknowledge, yes, there are people who are scientists and people who are eminent scientists who don't believe there is any God. And I'm very happy to engage with their arguments respectfully and show where their arguments are fallacies. But it's interesting to note with a lot of those folk that the return arguments are either to say, well, look, all the scientists, all the respectable people don't believe in God. Well, that's kind of what's called an ad hominem. You're attacking the person, not the argument, right? And so you listen to the quality of the argument and say, well, look, there's something else driving atheism, because it is refusal to acknowledge reasonable evidence of the sort that would stand up in any court.
It is a belief system.
It's a belief system. Actually, I would even say it's an unbelief system because it's a refusal to believe.
So let's take it that God exists and that he is a creator God and is responsible for all this. Why should we care? Why should that make a difference to us in our daily life?
it changes the purpose and the reason for our living. The interesting thing is, I think Malcolm Muggeridge said it once, so I believe he was an atheist at the time when he met Mother Teresa. And he came away with this yearning and this longing in his heart, and he made this famous comment that there is a God-shaped gap inside every human being that only God can fulfill. Now, every human being has a desire for something ultimate, right? Look at the way that people go gaga over singers, over celebrity. The desire for celebrity is the desire for something that sparkles and is brighter and is more beauty. It is something beautiful I can reach to, perhaps something true, perhaps something good. And ultimately behind every yearning in the human heart is this desire for goodness, beauty and truth. Whether we've got good representations of it or not, we don't know. But to know the reality of the God who is love, the God who gave us the law, the beautiful law of the ethics contained in the Ten Commandments, dare I say them today. The God who gave us the new covenant, the God who gave us the love your neighbour as yourself, the God who gave us the Sermon on the Mount and the beauty of these things. This is where there's true beauty, goodness and truth. And to not have God in our everyday life means that the fundamental yearning of the human heart for what is good, true and beautiful has to be manufactured, has to be fabricated. And so much of the entertainment industry is, curiously enough, built about fulfilling those liturgies, creating liturgies or things that we do that help us feel we're connected to what's good, sophisticated, clever, fashionable. And all of those things are substitutes for this ultimate glory and universal beauty and goodness that we're all designed to engage with, but are substitutes for it.
So I guess we're starting to get into an area here of reflecting on the nature and character of who God is. So it's not just this God, this all-powerful being that created this planet or this cosmos we live within and said, like, set and forget. Set it free, I've done that, let's move on to my next project. What you seem to be indicating here is we're talking about a God that wants to be involved and continues to be involved on an ongoing basis within and to and as part of that creative product. So we're now starting to talk about what is God like? Okay, if we should care about, why does he care about us? Why does he not just say, well, I've done that, let them do their thing on that planet I built them? But it's more than that, isn't it? There's a relational aspect, a character aspect.
Now, this is something that needs weeks of conversation. This is absolutely beautiful. Let's just start with the phrase that the Apostle John said, God is love. Take a look at the first line of what we often call the Apostles' Creed, which, interestingly enough, the fragments from which the Apostle Creed was put together were written before the New Testament scriptures became accepted, what they call canonized. And the first line of that is, I believe in God, the Father, creator of heaven and earth, right? Now, it's interesting that in the Greek, another interesting thing, it was first written in Latin, then translated to Greek. And my dad was Greek in background, and one day a couple of years before he died, he had such a, if you like, a bit of an epiphany, an engagement with something. He must have something really touched his spirit. He came to me and he said, Peter, I don't speak Greek, but I could still imitate his accent. He said, Peter, he said, you know that part in the creed where it says, I believe in God, maker of heaven and earth? I said, yes, Dad. He said, do you know what maker is in Greek? And I said, what, Dad? He said, poetes, the poet. You see, God is a God of beauty. And when we think of who the Christian God is that we love, it's pistevo eis theos. I believe in one God. Patera, my Father. To even call God Father means that there's an incredible loving thing. The Lord's Prayer. Jesus said, when you pray, first of all say, our Father. That is Father of all mankind. Father of me, of my brothers and sisters who are human beings. Father, you are the creator of all things. You are the one from whom everything exists. So when I lift my eyes to the hills, that's who you are, the Lord creator of heaven and earth. But we often think of God as this, have to be this incredibly careful, clever, powerful, sometimes harsh. Well, he's certainly not that, right? Loving being he is, but he created us for beauty. The poet of heaven and earth, the artist of all creation. Now, the sad thing is a lot of that's been despoiled and fallen away from it and damaged. But God in his glory says, no, what I originally created this all for, I will do. So we have someone who is a loving parent. He doesn't need us, he wants us. And you know, to be wanted is more secure than to be needed.
Yeah, and this is where we really do diverge paths with all other concepts of, I guess, other world religions of what God is, isn't it? Because the whole concept of God as our Father is unique to the Judeo-Christian model, and it's something that I guess became even stronger within the Christian understanding even more than the Judaic. No other faith, no other religion, if you like, would give you that intimate relationship. Now, whether it's the Greeks or whether it's the Romans, their gods were aloof and distant and as you said, harsh.
Yes.
And even now, if you look at within the Hindu faith or any of those kind of current day faiths, God is not the loving Father.
No, and that's where I love the story of the prodigal son, where we're human beings to a very large degree. We're like the sons who have said we want to take our inheritance and party and do whatever we want to do, but ultimately we slowly consume our lives until eventually the son is left nowhere to live but trying to share the slops that the pigs are given in the pigsty. And then he comes to his senses and says, hey, listen, I've got to return to my father, only to find the father waiting for him. Now, the interesting thing is that the father, in his love, is severe in one way, in that he will not allow that which is unloving to enter his house. And so all the things we become attracted to, which are our selfishnesses and our unlovingnesses, right, and our angers and our lusts, those things are not loving. They don't belong to the contours and the shape of love. And God says, no, if you want that, then you've got to go and have it with the pigs, right? But I want you back in my house knowing what true, gentle, gracious, embracing love actually is. So there's a severity in it. And I don't believe that God is into punishment or retribution. Sometimes I think we translate those things, unfortunately. But he is severe in that he will not allow whatever is unloving to come into his domain, because he loves us and he wants us to know the fullness of his love.
Peter, I think we've laid some great groundwork there today. I think we've started to unveil who our God is, I believe, and I think that's awesome, and I really look forward to our next conversation.
Lovely. Talk more about the poet of heaven and earth.
And why he bothered with humanity.
Yes, and remember, it's because he wants you, not because he needs you.
Amen. Thank you, Peter.
Think About It with Pastor Peter Karblas is a production of Rhema.cc.